So for my first ever review, I've gone for the best single malt in the world. Don't really feel I've given myself anywhere to go from here. Well, without wanting to give too many of my concluding thoughts away, I've not chosen this as the best single malt in the world. It was the World Whisky Awards 2022. Now, I've not chosen it just because of this award. In fact, I'll probably focus mostly on Scotch in the future. But I live in the English Lake District, and so this is my local whisky. The distillery itself is only a few miles up the road, so I thought it was a really, really good one to start with. Now, you'd have every right to be surprised that this bottle picked up the Best Single Malt Award. Not only is it relatively young, the whiskey's probably about 7 years old in the bottle, but it's also English, which in the whiskey world, with Scotch being so dominant for so long, is a bit of a surprise. A little bit of background about the Lakes Distillery. They opened in 2014, so they're relatively new, but they've clearly made a big impression already. The distillery itself sits at the top of Bassenthwaite Lake, which is just a few miles from where I'm recording this now. And it's a lovely, lovely spot. It's a really, really nice distillery. They've got some alpacas out the back as well, jumping on grass. But it's a very, very nice place, and if you get a chance to visit, I really, really recommend it. They also make a big deal of the water from the River Derwent, which flows just behind the distillery. And they have a big sort of flyover presentation that can make you feel a little bit motion sick, but it's quite good and a good way of introducing you to the river. And the video shows it flowing from source all the way out to the sea. So that's quite nice and worth having a look at if you're there. At the forefront of their marketing material sits the whisky maker Davil Gandhi, who started his career with Heineken before moving on to the Macallan, which is where he probably got his passion for sherry casks, which, as you'll see, are very, very predominant in this whisky. Unusually, Davil's not just involved in the blending, but he worked with the distillation and the maturation stages as well of the whisky, so he sees it through its whole life and all the processes. Particularly interesting from his point of view is the use of different yeast strains to get different base spirits, and they make a big deal of that as well, but perhaps we'll cover yeast strains on another day. It's probably a little bit too much for today. Davil's clearly taken a lot of his philosophy from the Macallan. There's a huge use of ex-sherry casks in the making of this whisky. This one particularly is Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez, and there's apparently some red wine casks being used as well, just for a little bit of the kind of tannic notes that you get. But in stark contrast to the Macallan, this has been bottled at a very generous 52% and is natural colour and non-chill filtered, although you can't find that information on the box or on the bottle. You have to go digging for it, and that's a little bit frustrating. So let's actually try the stuff. So it's a lovely colour, and you can see the effect of the sherry casks on the colour there. Now on the nose, you get a lot of stewed fruits, spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, maybe a little bit of anise, which is quite an interesting spice in whiskey actually when you get that. Maybe there's a bit of toffee sauce in there as well, which is actually quite interesting because I think one of the tasting notes they use is dates. And with toffee sauce and dates you get sticky toffee pudding, which is a local Lakeland delicacy, of course. And then maybe sort of mince pies and Christmassy flavours as well, which kind of combines all the fruits and the spices really, really well. If you're not British, mince pies are a sort of fruit pie that we have at Christmas time. I like them, bit of an acquired taste, but I eat a lot of them in December. So let's have a try on the palate. So you get more of the spice notes, the kind of woody spice notes on the palate, and then the dark dried fruits really come out. It's 52%, but I have to say it's very smooth for 52%. It's very drinkable. I haven't added any water yet, and I'm not struggling with burn or anything like that. So Dhaval Gandhi himself was born in India, and what's interesting about that is that it means he has a whole different set of references to pick out the kind of tasting notes that he's chosen for this whiskey. It kind of highlights how subjective they can be and how they're based on our own experiences and our own world and our own palates and everything that we've experienced in them. So one person from one culture will get something completely different to another person from another culture. So I use mince pies as a sort of tasting note and a reference, which is something I eat every Christmas. For Dhaval Gandhi, he makes reference to Manuka honey, to dates, to cashew nuts, and you can certainly smell the dates actually. It's a very kind of sweet and sticky scent. It's not too sweet when you taste it, but on the nose a little bit more so. Interestingly, when you add water to this, it does get sweeter. There's a kind of creaminess that kind of comes into the whiskey as well. More raisins, more sultanas, that dried fruit. So mince pies with brandy cream or something like that maybe. And the rich fruitiness still comes through on the palate a great deal, but it gets much sweeter, much stickier with that little bit of water, and that Manuka honey perhaps that they're referring to on the packaging sort of comes through. I don't know what Manuka honey tastes like. I've never tried it. It costs about £20 a jar or something like that. It's madness. Okay, I've looked it up. It's not £20 a jar. Selfridges have a jar for £559 for a jar of Manuka honey. We're not talking a big jar, small jar. So yeah, it's not really a kind of working person's reference point, I have to say, Manuka honey. I have no idea what it tastes like. So this is a very accomplished whiskey, especially for its age. When I first tried it, I really couldn't believe it was only 7 years old. It does have the depth of something quite a bit older than that, and especially when you compare it with other heavily sherried whiskies that are at the younger age of the spectrum. I think there's a real trick that the Lakes Distillery have pulled off here, and so many distilleries are trying to do so much more with much younger stocks these days. The Lakes have done something quite special with pretty young whiskey. One wonders where the Lakes might go from here. Their marketing's very full on in the kind of premium market sense, and it's a crowded market with big brands like Macallan and Dalmore trying to take up a huge amount of the market share there. So I don't know where the Lakes fit into that, but they clearly want to be above the level of a souvenir jar of chutney or biscuits or something that you pick up on the usual trip to a tourist destination like the Lake District. They want to establish themselves as a big whiskey brand, and the product is definitely speaking to that. It's very high quality. Dhaval Gandhi himself has a consultancy business now, so whether he stays with the Lakes Distillery and continues to work there and with them remains to be seen. But he'll be a big loss if he doesn't, because what he's created here is good. In terms of a score, it's quite tricky. I don't really like to score out of 100. It doesn't really seem to make all that much sense to me, as nothing ever seems to get below 70 and nothing ever seems to get higher than 95. So actually you're only working within a 35-point range. You also don't really understand why the score's been given. There's no sort of criteria as to what means it gets this, that or the other. So I've devised my very own simple system. It's scoring the bottle out of 35. Why 35, you say? Well, it means I can weight the score in favour of what's inside the glass, inside the bottle, not just other factors which I do want to take into consideration but are perhaps less important. So 15 points will be given to the whiskey itself, what's inside the bottle, and another 10 points will be given to value and another 10 points to quality. Both of those things having a big bearing on the final score. So with this, value-wise, it cost me about £65, although nowadays it's going online for an awful lot more because it won the award. That's a lot of money for a young whiskey, £65 and more, but to be fair, its content is very good, and I don't think it's necessarily an unfair price. Interestingly, the number 5, this is the number 4, but the number 5 has just come out, and it is £70. I haven't tried it yet. I've got a bottle, and I will try it. Maybe I'll record my first try of it, and we can see if it's as good as the number 4. But that's in a similar kind of area in terms of price. especially with inflation. So value-wise, I'll give it 7 points. Quality, well, it is non-chill filtered, it is natural colour, it's presented at a solid 52% ABV. It's clear very, very good casks have been used. I think that's how they've gotten the most out of the young spirit inside. The fact that the distillery shows off that they've got a very good relationship with bodegas, sherry bodegas in Spain, and cooperages probably means that they want to show off that they're using high quality wood. And I would say that they probably are. In terms of quality, I'll give this a 9. Flavour wise, it's deep, it's rich, it's precocious in its maturity. There's a very slight sign of age, and for that reason I'm very excited to see what future iterations of this whisky will be like. I think you'd struggle to pick out in a blind tasting that it was very, very young, with all things like ABV being equal. So for that reason, I'll give it a 13 out of 15 for the actual spirit that's inside the bottle. In total, that gives us a score of 29 out of 35. Is that right? Yeah. So when I try some other whiskies, we'll see how that stacks up. So this is a really, really very good whiskey. If you get the chance to try it, if you're ever in the Lake District, for example, and you see it behind a bar, then do give it a try. It's well worth it, and it's good value for money as a kind of bar dram as well. I'm going to stop short of saying that this is the best single malt in the world, but then again, I haven't tried them all. Not yet, at least. Sláinte mhath.